Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, I want to talk about perceptual fluidity, which is something that is incredibly important to you if you're interested in cracking these codes out here in the Matrix. You see, the Matrix works by keeping our perception, our awareness, operating in very specific avenues. And when our perception and our awareness is operating in these particular avenues, that becomes our life, because where we focus our perception and our awareness dictates not only how we see the world, ladies and gentlemen, but it dictates how we use up our energy. So for many of us here in the material world, we have had training wheels put on our perception at a very young age. We were taught how to think, how to feel, and how to look at the world, and we are now the byproduct of that absolute truth. Most people have been on the same rat wheel the duration of their life. And this is what most people know at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen. So there's a few things that I really want to make abundantly clear before we continue. Your perception, your awareness dictates your reality, ladies and gentlemen. The ancient sorcerers, the Toltecs, the Gnostics, ancient witches, certain pagan orders, you name it, knew that our perception has not only fluidity, but the ability to be locked in certain perceptual prisons, if you want to call them that. And that when humans are given specific parameters to operate within when it comes to perception, they can be easily controlled. This is how the New World Order keeps us bound in servitude, ladies and gentlemen. It's through your perception. It's through your awareness. So, again, I really want to make that abundantly clear that most people have been on the same rat wheel their entire life. You came out of the womb, and when babies are born, they have perceptual fluidity that's just incredible, ladies and gentlemen. Their assemblage point isn't fixed in a specific location, and because of that, they are able to see spirits. They are able to see things that you cannot see. This is why when children are born, they oftentimes point at corners of the room or laugh or interact in ways that make it seem like something invisible is there around them. Babies, infants, etc. have more perceptual fluidity. They haven't been taught yet how to look at the world. They haven't been given an array of definitions on how to interpret the world, if you will. So when babies come out the womb, ladies and gentlemen, again, more often than not, you can see them interacting with the world in a completely different way than you, the adult, that's brainwashed. So I'm not saying you're brainwashed to any of my patrons. I'm speaking in generalities here. But, parents, people who are indoctrinated, are taught to say or scoff, or not scoff, but they're taught to look at their children interacting with these invisible realms as, oh, they're just children, they're just babies, they don't know any better. When in fact, it's you, the adult, who's been brainwashed, and now you look at an individual, an entity that's not brainwashed, and think that, oh, they're just children, they're not developed yet. We have everything backwards here in the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. We have got everything backwards here in the Matrix. I don't think most people realize the extent of our mind control. And it's going to take some serious effort on your part to push through these perceptual boundaries that your consciousness, that your soul has been trapped in. It's going to take a lot of passion, some anger, some determination, and some forward momentum to escape the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. And what is the Matrix? The Matrix is a slave generator. It takes your perception at a very young age and instructs it over a period of years on how to interpret the world and take in information from the outside world, and it teaches you how to define life. Again, it teaches you how to define life. So what used to be a tree, ladies and gentlemen, what used to be a magical tree when you were younger, it just becomes a tree. A rock just becomes a rock, or a flower just becomes a flower. You're given definitions on how to define the world around you, and more often than not, when we learn how to define things with the system's standard definitions, things lose their meaning. So what do I mean by that? When you're younger, ladies and gentlemen, you interact with nature without any predetermining. And what I mean by that is that you are an innocent soul. You are interacting with the world around you without a set of definitions. When you don't have definitions to define things, you interact with them in a completely different fashion. But once you start going through that education system, you get taught what things are, you get definitions about, you are instructed about their definitions, and you lose that childhood sense of awe. Your perception is now operating down specific avenues. I hope that makes sense. How we define things dictates our world, because definitions more often than not lead to beliefs. And we know, as we've talked about in a handful of my videos, that beliefs instruct the subconscious mind. Got a spider on my camera here, folks. Beliefs are what create our reality through the subconscious. So when you start to have a bunch of definitions about the world and what things are, you start to create these units of information that turn into beliefs, and beliefs instruct your subconscious mind on how to create your reality, so to speak. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I would highly suggest going back and watching my Learning the Magical Arts series and my psychology series here on the Patreon page, so that you can become familiar with what I'm talking about, because this is absolutely crucial. Perceptual fluidity is the key to expanding your horizons, to expanding your consciousness through breaking through the matrix. The matrix is just a system, ladies and gentlemen, that seeks to dominate the way our minds work. It seeks to dominate as well as our minds. It seeks to dominate our bodies, the health of our bodies, the virility of our bodies, the strength of our bodies, the longevity that we have. The matrix has got us living to about 80 years old, and we've learned to think that that's the norm. This body was designed to live far past 100, ladies and gentlemen, but you wouldn't know that because, again, you've been given a set of definitions on how to look at the world, have you not? By interacting with the matrix, you take all of the information and turn them into units of information that turn into your perception. The matrix has taught you how to look at the world. There were always teachers to tell you what to think. There were always parents, loved ones, friends and their family, etc. You've molded your view of the world based on how you've interacted with the world and its people. And I hate to tell you, but the majority of the people that you interacted with at a young age, the people who taught you how to think and how to look at the world, regardless of how loving and well-meaning they were not aware of the bigger picture. And because of that, you are a byproduct of that illegitimate parenting and being raised. So unfortunately, to be completely honest with you, people don't like to hear how their parents probably had flaws, or that, people don't like to hear how the way they were raised was entirely backwards, regardless of how well-meaning and loving those people were who raised you. I'm not here to sugarcoat the truth, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to give you the truth, and I'm here to articulate it to the best of my ability. I don't have time to be patient and to be nice to everyone and to try to make everything that happened to you seem like, oh, it's just part of some divine plan, this, that, or the other. I hope that makes sense. Here in the New Age community, everybody wants to think that everything happens for a reason, and that, don't question your childhood. Everything happened for a reason, blah, blah, blah. Don't question the bad or the evil in the world. No, we have to question everything. And the reason I brought that up, ladies and gentlemen, is that we have absolutely and wholeheartedly, we have got to question our childhood and our upbringing, because that's where our initial programming was set in motion, ladies and gentlemen. So we've talked about this in a handful of my videos. We've talked about perceptual fluidity. We've talked about the assemblage point and how it dictates your reality. There is a large body of curriculum here on my Patreon page where we talk a lot about this stuff. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, I would highly suggest going back and watching some of those earlier videos. And yeah, some of these videos are longer, but this is a very important subject to become familiar with. We're talking about regaining the power of our mind. This is not something that can be encapsulated, if I can speak today, in a 2-minute video, ladies and gentlemen. So, we've got to go back in time to see where we went wrong or what happened to us that caused our minds to become so rigid, that caused our perceptual fluidity to become rigid and locked into one position. And that's why everyone, for the most part, here in the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen, although they might have unique interests, and yeah, not everybody's similar for the most part, everybody has different hobbies, etc., but that's why most people are always the same. Everybody is the same, ladies and gentlemen, with subtle variations. Everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's doing they're on the grind. Everybody, for the most part, in the Matrix is operating in a very similar fashion. Am I wrong? And although they have differences in interests, and oh, my favorite color's blue, or that person's favorite color is purple, people have differences, but for the most part, their energetic configuration is locked into a very similar position. This is called perceptual control. They lack perceptual fluidity. Everyone's been trained how to think and interpret the world that we live in. And now, because of that, we operate in a tiny fraction of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Perceptual fluidity, ladies and gentlemen, when you start to break free from your mind control, you start to be able to tap into the a bigger percentile of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's why when people start breaking free from the mind control, they're able to see deeper into the matrix. They start to see spirits. They might start to see energy fields around plants, around other human beings. It's called gaining your perceptual fluidity. We're in a state of mind control because the fluidity of our perception, our awareness, our minds, etc., has been put into a specific box. And that box is compounded in so many different ways, ladies and gentlemen. It enslaves us in so many different ways. For one, it teaches you through the school system that you have to do what you're told. You have to do this curriculum. You've got to graduate. You've got to get everything done. Otherwise, you might not amount to anything. If you don't go to college, if you don't get this, blah, 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 you won't have a car. You might end up homeless. There's all of these things that we're told at a young age that inspire us to play by the system's rules. And we do that out of fear. It's the only thing we know. And we've all been through the education system. We've all been thrown onto this conveyor belt, and we've all been forced to interact with the world based on the system's standards. Well, I'm here to tell you that as an adult, you have the ability to realize that your perception, your awareness, your energetic configuration, all of these components of you have been manipulated, and they are not manipulated in your benefit. And that you can realize this and break into pieces the perceptual blinders that have been put over your entire experience, and that you, in doing so, can backpedal and regain the fluidity of your consciousness and start to reacquire the power that the Matrix has stolen from you. The Matrix works overtime, ladies and gentlemen, to keep you in this very specific state of being. And we violate this state of being through the art of sorcery, through the art of magic. So, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a giant blanket of energy. The world that we live in is pure energy. But all you can see now is solid objects because your perception, your awareness has been taught to only see the physical objects. Every great sorcerer, brujo, witch, Gnostic, etc., knows that we live in a giant conglomeration of energy. This is what the Toltecs called the eagle's emanations. We live in a vast, infinite field of energy. And again, the eagle's emanations, or what the Toltecs called the eagle's emanations, is the greatest success, let's just put it this way, to the ancient sorcerers was to be able to see the fundamental energetic undercurrent of the reality that we live in. So right now, again, when you look in front of you, you see a tree, right? Well, there are states of consciousness that you can enter into, ladies and gentlemen, where you can start to see not only the energy around the tree, the auras, you name it, but you can see the giant fourth and fifth dimensional grid of energy that holds everything together here in this world. Now, this grid is a vast labyrinth of intelligent, living, conscious filaments and fibers that are all aware of one another. This is what I call God. There is a grid everywhere in this world of spiritual energy that literally holds particles, atoms, molecules, etc. together. We can no longer see this grid, ladies and gentlemen. We were designed, our perception was designed to be able to see this grid and to interact with it. Again, this is what's known as the eagle's emanations. The greatest success to the ancient sorcerers, at least within the Toltec system, was to be able to see the eagle's emanations, to be able to see the fundamental undercurrent of what holds everything together. You see, here in the Matrix, we just operate while interacting with the hard objects that we think is reality. This is just insane, ladies and gentlemen. This is an insane world that we live in, and nothing that I can, I do my best to try to portray how insane this has become here, but I just fear that the way that I structure my words isn't as effective as it potentially could be. I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that your perception is being molded, and that you are only at this point able to see a small percentage of the truth. What do you think enlightenment is, ladies and gentlemen? Enlightenment, to enlighten that which is hidden. And we are being exponentially lied to, ladies and gentlemen, about the reality that we live in. We live in an energetic ocean. What appears to be solid is far from solid. Our perceptual blinders, however, we only see solid objects because, again, this is how our perception has been molded. We've been molded to see the finality of the energetic conglomerations. I hope that makes sense. So, I think that you absolutely should become familiar with the works of Carlos Castaneda, ladies and gentlemen. Start reading them. Start looking into shamanism. Start looking into sorcery. Start looking into what's known as power plants. We'll talk about those in a few moments. We need allies, ladies and gentlemen, in a power plant. Power plants can be very potent allies in this world. You see, we've been molded and we've been affected by the Matrix to such an extent that you can't just wave your finger with a wand over your current condition and fix things. We need medicinal tools, ladies and gentlemen, to get us back on track. And, although I talk about the medicinal mushrooms, the chaga, the reishi, these things are great. These are very potent things for your physical health. We need things, ladies and gentlemen, like the power plants, like the shamanistic entheogens and the San Pedro. We need certain things, psychedelic compounds. Now, I'm not recommending that you do these. I'm just telling you what works for me and what continues to work for me and what works for thousands of other people. We need strong potions that can force our mind into foreign states outside of our conditioning so that we can look at things from an outside perspective. I hope that makes sense. So a great place to start is The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge by Carlos Castaneda. In that book, Carlos is taught about the many intricacies of power plants and altering consciousness. That's all I'm going to say at this point. Altering consciousness can be one of the most profound ways to experience reality outside of your conditioning. Altering consciousness through the use of psychedelic compounds and these ritualistic tools can allow you to quantum leap with your development, whereas the person who refuses the power plants and these compounds, it might take them 20, 30, 40 years to experience what they could experience in moments with the use of a power plant. But again, I'm not recommending that you do this, and there's a handful of parameters that have to be checked off the checklist before you use these compounds, because if you do not use them properly and if you do not use them with reverence, you can end up being burned badly by them, ladies and gentlemen. This is not some game. This is not some joke to play around with. Waking up is going to be a detrimental process by default. So doing things properly, taking the extra safety precautions, is of utmost importance to ensure a more comfortable ride on the path of walking the razor's edge. Waking up here in the Matrix is going to not be easy. Because to a large extent, ladies and gentlemen, waking up is the process of realizing how grandly you've been lied to, and how much of a joke has been played on you, and how much you've bought into it and developed an ego in response to a backwards view of the world. And waking up, ladies and gentlemen, entails you to unlearn what you've learned so that you can, by default, relearn. I've talked about this in a handful of my older videos. It's just like Yoda said in, I think, it's either the first or the third Star Wars film, I believe, where Yoda tells Luke, you have to unlearn what you've learned. And as you unlearn what you've learned, which is just a poetic way of saying that you have to unlearn your bullshit. By unlearning your bullshit that you've been indoctrinated with, you by default, as a response to that, attain wisdom. The unlearning process is the learning process. I hope that makes sense. But when Yoda says you have to unlearn what you've learned, he's not necessarily talking about book material, which is what most people think of when they think of learning. They think of education and textbooks and all this other stuff. No, Yoda's talking about the perceptual entrainment that has been encoded into Luke's mind that is keeping him from being able to access the Force, which is the Kundalini energy. I hope that makes sense. That is such a crucial piece of information to understand, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think Yoda means when he tells Luke you have to unlearn what you've learned? He's not talking about, you got to go back and, unlearn all the stuff you learned in, grammar and all the vocabulary and stuff you learned in school. No, he's talking about the perceptual entrainment that the world that he's lived in has instructed his consciousness to abide by, that's keeping him, I just spilled my coffee, from being able to access the Force. You see, that's a beautiful way of demonstrating things in that film. Yoda tells Luke that there's barriers in his mind that are keeping him from being able to experience or utilize the full potential of his body and his mind, which is the Force. Using the Force, ladies and gentlemen, is only obtainable to someone who is a Jedi. And a Jedi, which goes back to the Djed people in Egypt, the Djed pillar. We'll talk about that in an upcoming video, ladies and gentlemen. George Lucas was onto something. But a Jedi is just a fancy metaphor, ladies and gentlemen, for someone who's gone through the process of learning how to use the full expression of his or her body and mind. I hope that makes sense. I don't want to stay on this topic for too long, but it's crucial. Yoda tells Luke you have to unlearn what you've learned, because Yoda's privy to the fact that the learning process that Luke was saturated with at a young age instructed his mind to not be able to use the full potential of his mind and body. The same thing goes on here in the Matrix. We are taught at a young age how to look at the world, how to interact with the world. We're given specific definitions on how to define things. We're taught what's possible, what's impossible. We're taught what we should do with our lives, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, the education system, pretty much at middle school. I'm not even at middle school. What am I saying? I remember in kindergarten, no joke, 1st and through 5th grade. I remember my teacher telling us that it's time to start considering what you want to do with your life. Before you're even allowed time to experience reality without input from adults, without input from these teachers come into your life, ladies and gentlemen, and tell you to start fretting and worrying about what what career you want to have. You're taught, school teaches you how to have a career. And unbeknownst to many people, your career and the striving for a career at a young age causes you to use massive amounts of energetic fortitude, mental power, etc. to obtain. You focusing on what you're going to become 20 years, down the road is what ends up occupying people's minds. And you're taught along the journey of school to let go of all those imaginary friends that are actually very real. You're told that, you've got to grow up and it's time to stop playing, and that it's just insane. It is absolutely insane. And I know that only a small percentage of people who watch my channel are going to be able to understand this and utilize it. Because a lot of people have a lot invested in the illusion, ladies and gentlemen, in the illusion. When you buy into the illusion, you get rewarded by the system. The system rewards people whose energetic configuration matches with, with the system. When you start to violate the system's rules and start to trod your own unique path, when you start to ignite the black flame within, when you start to attain the Promethean fire and say no to the system, I don't want this, when you start to wake up and change your perceptual fluidity, when you start to expand your horizons and redirect the energy that you're losing to the matrix back into your system so that you can attain more power, when you start to truly become more conscious, when you start to break the perceptual molds that the system has given you, your energetic configurations by default don't match with the systems at large here in the matrix, and the system starts to give you hell. Again, I've said in many of my videos that the system rewards complacency and familiarity. It does not reward perceptual fluidity. This is why I call it walking the razor's edge. Samael Aun-Weor, the author of the Yellow Book, famously called waking up in this world walking the razor's edge. It's going to have some dangers to it. For many people, it's much more comforting to just go along with the motions and enjoy the false pleasures, if you will, of this material realm. I'm here to tell you that there's much more to life than what we're being told, ladies and gentlemen. And that in order to change our lives, we've got to go into our minds and change the parts of ourselves that are still a part of what Yoda said. We have to unlearn what we've learned. We've got to get rid of all the crap. So, the motionlessness exercise, the full body relaxationless exercise, and the thoughtlessness exercise, those are 3 pivotal exercises that you should start using so that you can start to freeze your overactive mind, and so that you can systematically target the foreign installations of the mind and start removing them out of self-love. We have a handful of videos here on the Patreon page about how to do this, so I'm not going to be repetitive. All I'm going to say is that those exercises are crucial. You can also utilize those exercises with the use of a power plant. Power plants, ladies and gentlemen, are very potent compounds that exert a very profound influence on the mind of the user. So I'm not going to name any in this video. All I'm going to say is that read Carlos Castaneda's book, The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge. That's a good primer. There are illegal power plants, and then there are legal power plants, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm just going to say that kratom, also known as kratom or kratom, can be a very potent power plant to an individual who uses it properly. That is a legal substance, and it drastically can allow an individual's mind to calm down to the point where you can notice the foreign installations of the mind without even having to do the meditations, the full body relaxation exercise, the motionlessness exercise, and the thoughtlessness exercises. Kratom can actually help you notice the foreign installations of your mind without even having to do those exercises. But if you utilize kratom with those exercises, you can experience a drastic improvement in your you can get from point A to point B much quicker. Excuse me. Certain power plants are divine tools, ladies and gentlemen. Nature grows these things for us so that we can use them. Now, a lot of the times power plants are so essential here in the Matrix is because our perceptual fluidity is so cemented. We don't have any fluidity, ladies and gentlemen. Our awareness is so rigid here in the Matrix that for the majority of us, we need something that's going to forcibly move our assemblage point into a new position. So again, I'm not going to talk about the assemblage point in this video. All I'm going to say is that go back and watch my videos on the assemblage point. Read the works of Castaneda. Again, the assemblage point is part of our energy field that can move. And based on its moving or its position, that dictates how much of the electromagnetic spectrum we can interact with and see. So if your assemblage point is in a very fixed position, you see the world based on its position. But power plants and certain substances and potions, etc., in the process of true alchemy, can cause the assemblage point to forcibly tear into new positions, allowing your consciousness to be able to take in more information, allowing you to see more of the reality that you live in. Hope that makes sense. Allows you to access more of your mind as well. So this is one of the reasons why many people need power plants. It's because you're so locked into perceptual blindness that you aren't even aware of it. And that it can take people 100 years of doing things without power plants to get from point. I don't even want to say that. How would I put it, ladies and gentlemen? Certain power plants in the works of shamanism and sorcery can allow you to get from point A to point B in one day, whereas you could spend your entire life fiddling around without them and never get anywhere. So again, kratom or kratom, whatever you want to call it, that particular plant has been very benevolent to me. Power plants don't work the same for everyone, though. What works for me may or may not work for you. Some plants reject people, the spiritual ally contained within the plant, and some plants work very well with people. So some people react very positively, for instance, to Salvia divinorum, whereas some people react very poorly to it. The ally is just not in alignment with them at that particular given time. So I have a video here on my Patreon page about power plants, about psychedelics, about the use of these compounds in religious ceremonies. I talked about how pretty much every ancient civilization venerated and used these particular substances as kind of like the religious underpinning of their culture. There's a reason why these substances are considered sacred. And they exert a very profound medicinal effect on many of the people here in the Matrix because of the fact that it can allow you to experience altered states of reality by opening up your perception to new possibilities. So, these are all very valid things to consider looking into power plants. I mean, it depends on how much you're really wanting to expand your horizons, expand your consciousness. There's some people who like this reality the way it is. And for them, the pursuit of sorcery and the manipulation of energy and the expansion of consciousness may not be for them. But for those of us who feel that there's more out there, for those of us who are irritated by the fact that we feel like there's more out there that's just slightly beyond our grasp that we can't attain, for us, we want to break through the limits and shatter what's keeping us from accessing the full potential of our being, of our minds, of our consciousness. There are solutions out there, ladies and gentlemen. Stop being bound by this idea that I'll never make it, or I'm not going to get there, or, I just need to bend or roll over and just, this is just the way life is, blah, blah, blah. No. You have got to constantly knock on wisdom's door until you knock it down. You have got to not give up. So, perceptual fluidity, ladies and gentlemen, has a lot to do with the assemblage point. Learning how to move the assemblage point is crucial to the expansion of your consciousness. So I've given a handful of methods on how to literally quantum leap into new states of consciousness. Now, I can't legally say certain things, so I have to watch what I say, but I've given you hints on what direction to go to if you're interested in learning more. So, we've got to constantly, again, ladies and gentlemen, knock on wisdom's door until it's beaten down. We have got to stop accepting things just because they seem to be, that's just the way it is. No. So, I'm going to wrap this one up, you guys. My battery's about to die. I love you all, and always remember that perceptual fluidity is the key to your ability to being able to see past the matrix. The matrix wants to keep your perception in a very fixed location. Peace be with you.